The Zodiac Killer, a name that sends chills down the spines of those familiar with the case, remains one of America's most infamous unsolved mysteries. His cryptic letters and taunting messages to the press only added to the fear and confusion surrounding his identity. Operating in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Zodiac terrorized communities with a string of seemingly random murders. His attacks were unpredictable, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to anticipate his next move. He targeted young couples, often in secluded areas, leaving a trail of blood and fear in his wake. These locations, once considered safe havens for romance, became scenes of unimaginable horror. But the Zodiac was not content with simply taking lives. He craved notoriety, attention, and a legacy that would live on long after his crimes. He sent cryptic letters to newspapers, filled with ciphers and strange symbols, daring the public and authorities to decode his messages. The Zodiac's reign of terror began in December 1968, and by 1969, he had already claimed the lives of 5 victims. Each murder was more brutal than the last, and the police were left with few clues to follow. His modus operandi was often the same: approaching couples in secluded lovers' lanes or parked cars. He would brandish a handgun and unleash his fury. The suddenness and violence of his attacks left little chance for his victims to escape. The brutality of the attacks, coupled with the Zodiac's blatant disregard for human life, shook the Bay Area to its core. The community was gripped by fear, and the police were under immense pressure to catch the killer. People were afraid to go out at night, and a sense of unease permeated everyday life. The Zodiac's threats to continue his killing spree kept the entire region on edge, as everyone wondered who would be next. Despite numerous investigations and countless hours spent by detectives, the Zodiac Killer's true identity remains a mystery to this day. His cryptic messages and eerie presence continue to haunt the memories of those who lived through the terror in the Bay Area.
The first confirmed victims of the Zodiac Killer were David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16. They were young, full of life, and had their whole futures ahead of them. On December 20th, 1968, the young couple was parked on Lake Herman Road, a well-known lover's lane, when they were attacked. It was a cold, dark night, and the area was eerily quiet, making the sudden violence even more shocking. David was shot in the head at close range while still in the car, a brutal and sudden end to a young life. While Betty Lou was shot 5 times in the back as she tried to flee. Her desperate attempt to escape was tragically cut short by the relentless gunfire. Their bodies were discovered the following day, sending shockwaves through the community. The small town was gripped by fear and sorrow as the reality of the brutal murders set in.
On July 4th, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time attacking Darlene Farron, 22, and Michael Mageau, 19, at the Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. The couple was enjoying a quiet evening together when their night turned into a nightmare. The assailant approached their parked car and fired multiple shots through the window, killing Darlene and seriously wounding Michael. The sudden attack left the car riddled with bullet holes, a grim testament to the violence that had occurred. Michael, despite his injuries, survived the attack and later provided police with a description of the gunman. His survival was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark and terrifying situation. However, the description was vague, and the Zodiac remained elusive. The police were left with more questions than answers, and the community was left in a state of unease, knowing that the killer was still out there, somewhere.
What set the Zodiac Killer apart from other criminals was his brazen communication with the authorities and the media. Unlike other serial killers who preferred to remain in the shadows, the Zodiac seemed to crave the spotlight, using his letters as a twisted form of self-promotion. Beginning in August 1969, he sent a series of taunting letters to the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Herald. These letters were not just simple notes. They were meticulously crafted to instill fear and confusion among the public and law enforcement. These letters, often filled with bizarre symbols and cryptic messages, became a hallmark of the Zodiac case. The symbols were not just random doodles, they were carefully designed to challenge and mock those who tried to decipher them. The killer claimed responsibility for the murders and threatened to kill again if his demands, which included the publication of his ciphers, weren't met. His threats were not empty. They were a chilling reminder of his capability and willingness to strike again. The ciphers, composed of seemingly random symbols and letters, became an obsession for both amateur and professional codebreakers. These ciphers were not just puzzles, they were a race against time to prevent further bloodshed. One of the ciphers, known as the 408 cipher, named after the number of characters it contained, was eventually cracked by a schoolteacher and his wife, Donald and Betty Harden. Their breakthrough was a significant moment in the case, offering a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark investigation. The deciphered message, while chilling, provided little insight into the killer's identity or motive. It was a taunting declaration of his actions and a twisted justification for his crimes, but it left investigators with more questions than answers. It contained boasts about the murders and a desire for recognition, but no concrete clues that could lead to his capture. The Zodiac's communication was a cruel game, one that kept everyone on edge and ensured his place in the annals of criminal history. The Zodiac Killer case captivated law enforcement agencies across Northern California, with multiple jurisdictions pooling their resources in a desperate attempt to bring the killer to justice. Despite their efforts, the investigation was plagued by dead ends, false leads, and the Zodiac's uncanny ability to evade capture. The letters and phone calls from the killer kept investigators on edge, but they also served to further taunt and humiliate the authorities. The lack of sophisticated forensic technology at the time hampered